Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Watson, and I'm Tualatin Valley Water District's Communications Supervisor. I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon for the second session of Talking Water in regards to the 2022 rate proposal. The scope of the conversation today is going to be on the drinking water rate proposal. Many of our customers do receive two utility bills on a single joint bill. We do that to save money with the Clean Water Services, who provides storm and wastewater management services. They have a separate board, a separate governance structure, and separate rate process. And their new rates took effect on July 1st. We can refer you over there to answer any questions you may have, but we are not able to answer any direct questions about a separate utility. Paul, could you go to the next slide?
I think we're waiting on something here.
I'm not going to go any further till we see. I don't know if Paul's disconnected or.
No, I did advance the slide. Are you not seeing virtual event guidelines?
I don't see any content. I don't know if the other participants are able to.
We are, Andrea.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'll just go on and fly blind then. Before we get started, we just want to give you some logistics on how the Microsoft Live Events format works. The Q&A is moderated. You can type your questions in. There's a thought bubble with a question mark in the middle of it. And if you type in there, we have staff who review those questions and publish them. So if you don't get it, seeing it in your chat right away, it's just because sometimes a lot of questions come in at the same time, and it does take us a few minutes to do that. And just as a reminder, we are a public agency, and we do adhere to non-discrimination policies and inclusive practices. So we ask that you keep any comments free of any derogatory or personalized or any kind of insensitive comments. We will edit those out if they're included in your Q&A chat. And go ahead, next slide. We have some wonderful content presenters for you this afternoon. You'll be hearing from Chief Executive Officer Tom Hickman, and you'll be hearing from Dave Kraska, our Willamette Water Supply Program Director, and Paul Matthews, our Chief Financial Officer. And Tom Hickman and Dave Kraska are both PE behind their name. That stands for Professional Engineer. And and for those of you that haven't joined us before, that may be a new acronym. We try to keep our acronyms to a minimum, so if something comes up that you don't understand, please type that into the chat. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to those in attendance. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to better understand what is driving our rates and our financial issues. And we are happy to share where we're at with those. So as you can see there, my responsibility is overseeing the operations of the district and from a high level, and our district priorities. You're going to hear a lot about the Willamette Water Supply System. And you're going to hear about our in-district infrastructure, or what we refer to as CIP, or Capital Improvement Program, and also about our partnerships and the work we're doing to get additional federal and state grants to help offset some of the increases that we have been seeing. So next slide, please. So first, right out of the gates, we'd like to share with you, why are we here? What's the issue? Why are we sharing this information? So what's changed? On December 15th, this last year, we got results from an open bid process on elements of our Willamette Water Supply Program. The opening bids that day and then subsequent since then, we've seen an increase in that program of $315 million. It took it from a $1.3 billion program to a $1.6 billion program. It was significant before but we had a way to pay for that. These increases happening in such a short time have really challenged us financially. These increases are largely being driven by the same things that you probably are seeing in your personal life. Inflation is a big issue. Labor costs and labor challenges are a big issue for us. Supply chain issues, all of that has impacted us in our Willamette water supply program. Those same things have impacted us on our operations and on our in-house capital projects. Those have also been impacted by those same things, and so we've seen increases there. Our rates are proposed to increase by $8.81 per month for a typical user. On a percentage basis, that's 14.25%. And we are proposing that happens on November 1st of this year. That increase is instead of the approved increase that our board adopted in the last biennium process of $5.83 a month, or 9.5%. So roughly $3 a month increase more than what we had anticipated when we initially put the budget together. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about why are we doing this project? What risks are we trying to mitigate here by doing this? So there are risks to our water supply. I would argue probably the most significant is seismic or earthquakes. That certainly is a threat to our current water supply system. And a big motivator for this investment that we're making is to address that very risk, that we have a seismically resilient water supply even after a significant seismic event. But other things beyond that threaten our supply. Drought, certainly. We've been fortunate with late rains this year that filled our reservoirs, but it's something that we are always watching, and we're seeing climate change also impact the timing of when we see those flows come in to fill our reservoirs. And then certainly things like power outages, fires are all risks to our current supplies. Next slide, please. So we have multiple sources of water. This is an important thing for any system to have. So we certainly, we're working on a new supply from the Willamette River. You're going to hear a great deal about that here momentarily. But we also pull water from the Talkin River and the Talkin watershed. We have two large reservoirs that we can draw from. One is primarily that we draw from, which is Barney Reservoir, but that's part of the Hag Lake and Barney Reservoir system. That all comes down to what we call the Joint Water Commission Treatment Plant, JWC, and water is treated there and delivered to your homes and businesses. So we also have a number of other reservoirs throughout the distribution system that really help us meet the day-to-day and week-to-week peaking. They don't provide a multi-week or multi-month supply, but they do help us deal with day-to-day and weekly peaking events. And then we also have aquifer storage and recovery. In that situation, we take moisture when it's available in wetter periods, and we actually inject that water then into the ground, fill up the aquifer, and then we can pull that water back out when demand is high. So it's another way we have to make our system more resilient. Then we have regional partnerships where we purchase bulk water. One of them I mentioned, which is through the Joint Water Commission. We have a significant source of our supplies from there. We also have a significant source of our supply through the Portland Water Bureau. But that is a contract that is coming to an end. And that's another reason for the investment in the Willamette water supply, is to mitigate or offset that loss in supply come 2026. And then water conservation is always a part of our water supply equation, and certainly during periods of drought, we really focus to stretch our existing supplies by relying on water conservation. Next slide, please. So how do we use the ratepayer money that we get, the monthly bills that you pay? What do we do with it? So one of the most significant things that we are currently doing is the construction of the Willamette water supply. You're going to hear that over and over. This has been a multi-decade investment, and it's a big project. You know, I kind of view this project as we are planting the trees that future generations get to enjoy the shade on. And we had similar people that did that for us, and this is our turn to make this kind of multi-generational investment that looks far into the future and creates a resilient supply for us today and far into the future. We also spend money on the maintenance and operations of the water system. That's the day-to-day stuff. That's running the pumps that we need to run. It's maintaining the pipes and the valves that we have to do day to day. And when you think about the fact that we have in the neighborhood of about 800 miles of pipe, thousands and thousands of valves in the system, all of that requires maintenance, and we spend money for our staff to maintain that. And then another significant portion of our budget goes to purchasing bulk water supply, both from Portland and from what I mentioned before, the Joint Water Commission. So we purchase our bulk water supply from those two sources, and that costs us money, and it's where a significant portion of our budget goes to. Next slide, please. So this is the whale of a problem, I guess you may want to look at it, or the immediate challenge that's in front of us. This is not something that is new. We always knew we were going to be facing this situation. What we didn't and could not have anticipated was the magnitude of change that we see in this graph in the short amount of time that it's happened over. That $315 million I mentioned at the beginning, that really was something that we had not anticipated, that level of change in this. So what you see here in the light blue is all of the investment that we will be making over the next few years here on the Willamette water supply project. So you can see it's a significant investment that's all compressed in a fairly short period to construct this whole thing. This is when all the dollars are going to get spent to actually build it. We are done with all the planning and designing of this. In the gray section, you also see an uptick in that here in these next couple of years, and that uptick you see is actually part of the in-district capital investment that we're having to make. That is also part of the Willamette Water Supply program. It's our Metzger pipeline. That pipeline will connect the Willamette supply to the Metzger region. And in order to do that, we have a significant in-district investment to make that all happen. So that's all underway now. But this is what's really posing a problem for us financially, is the magnitude of these and the change in magnitude of these. Next slide. So what have we been doing to try to manage these costs? So we have reduced our personnel services budget by 2.8%. That may not sound like much, but I will tell you, having been in part of different organizations, this is a lean utility. This is a lean organization, and we don't have much to cut in personnel. We frankly have none. We have delayed hiring. We have done all we can to save money there. You're going to hear about some other things we've done with benefits to save money. But we've really worked hard at being very judicious and questioning every hire and every backfill that we do as we're moving through these challenging years. We also, before we ever had these increases, we anticipated that there may be some level of increase, and we wanted to give ourselves some room in case that happens. So we made some very difficult decisions with our partners, and we deferred more than $50 million worth of projects that were associated with the Willamette program. These were not easy decisions to make. These weren't things that we were eliminating that were nice to haves. They are necessities, but they're ones that we felt like we could push out a few years to flatten that big curve that you saw and help push that curve out a bit. So we made those decisions before we were ever made aware of the increases that occurred since last December. And then the other thing we've done, and it's been going on for many years, is we also partnered with both Hillsborough and the city of Beaverton to help spread out these costs over a larger population, to buy down everybody's cost share. So we've done that, and it's been a great partnership. And when and where there's opportunities for new partnerships, we certainly look at those and consider those to help spread out those costs. Next slide, please. So I'm going to ask Dave Kraska to step in here. He's our Willamette Water Supply Program Director, and let him talk about some of the details of what he and his team have been doing to manage the costs of the project, and really what are the elements of the project, what are the benefits, how do we get to those decisions. I'm going to leave all that to Dave to explain and cover. So Dave?
All right, thank you, Tom. So yeah, this is my introduction slide as far as what I do and the priorities, but let's get into the presentation real quick, go into the outline. Four main parts of my presentation here is to talk about the long-term water supply selection, just how we got to where we are today, talk about the water supply program overview and the system overview, the progress we've made, and looking ahead. I'm going to get through my presentation pretty quickly because I want to make sure that we get to your questions as soon as we can. And also, Paul's got some very important information to present to you on the district finances. So next slide. Regarding the long-term water supply selection, this was a decision made back almost 10 years ago, back in 2013. TVWD performed an analysis, about a 2-year analysis of the various alternatives, long-term water supply alternatives that it had available to it. They're indicated here on the right-hand side, starting from the top and going clockwise. The first is a new groundwater supply constructed out in Solvay Island. The second one was purchasing water from City of Portland, which TVWD does now, and so it'd basically be extending and expanding that supply. The third was Mid-Willamette River, the Willamette supply, and then the fourth over there on the left-hand side there is increasing storage at Hag Lake, basically expanding supply from the Joint Water Commission. And the detailed analysis that was performed, technical analysis, financial analysis, environmental impact analysis, and also with a lot of public input, the Mid-Willamette supply was selected because of lower cost, meaning less impact on rates. Excellent water quality from that source provides ownership to the district in terms of owning its supply, which it does not currently enjoy with the City of Portland. It's a reliable supply and it has fewer environmental impacts of all the options considered. I'd like to emphasize that this supply would be replacing the Portland supply. So essentially, the analysis that was conducted, and I believe holds true today, is that this in the long-term costs, the Willamette supply is a lower cost option than staying with the City of Portland. Next slide. So with the selection made, we were given a mission, or back in 2013, the mission was created that drives everything that we do in the program. And it is written here on the left-hand side here. It's to provide a cost-effective, reliable, resilient water supply system by July 2026 that benefits the current and future generations of the communities we serve and supports a vibrant local economy. So this mission does a great job in terms of giving us a deadline, keeping us on track to be done by July 2026. And basically everything else in there is make sure that we get it right. That's a huge investment that the community is making, and make sure that we build it correctly. It's going to be resilient to stand up to earthquakes, and it's going to last 100 years or more. Next slide. So what does the system look like at a very high scale, or very granular scale? Here it looks like this. It starts at the south at the Willamette River. There's an existing intake on the Willamette River that we're expanding and we're improving the seismic resiliency of. We're constructing a new state-of-the-art water treatment plant in Sherwood, more than 30 miles of large diameter transmission main, large diameter meaning 66-inch welded steel pipe, and water storage tanks. Water storage tanks are planned for the top of Cooper Mountain. There's 2 of them. We're only going to be constructing 1 in this first iteration of the construction effort. Next slide. So I've got some photos here to give you kind of a visual image of what each of these elements looks like. Starting here with an aerial photo of the Willamette River Water Treatment Plant. Thanks, Paul. Basically, this is a drone shot looking out towards the Willamette River with the Willamette River Water Treatment Plant in the foreground. It's down there in the city of Wilsonville, and the flag there at the end there is the raw water pump station, or the raw water intake. Now, if we go to the aerial view, you'll see a dashed outline that extends out into the Willamette River, basically highlighting where the intake screens are out in the Willamette River. You can't see them, obviously, but they're underneath the water. And there's a pipeline that connects to the raw water facility that's located on the bank of the Willamette River. So that's where we get the water from. Next slide, then. Another major element of the water supply system is the water treatment plant. Now, the Willamette River Water Treatment Plant, which also draws from the Willamette River, has been in operation for about 20 years, and at the time that it was constructed, it was considered a very high-tech facility. But there's been a lot of technical advances in water treatment since that time, and we're taking advantage of all of them in the design and construction of our water treatment plant that we're building in Sherwood. So that's shown in the engineering drawing on the right-hand side of this graphic. At the lower right-hand side of the graphic is a chart that basically shows what we mean by a multi-barrier treatment process. At the left-hand side of that chart are all the constituents, the types of constituents of things that are in the water that we want to remove from the water to make sure that the water is safe for public consumption. And then across the top there are the different processes that we have and will employ at the water treatment plant. And every one of those stars indicates a barrier that each one of those processes provides for each one of the constituents. And so you can see going across from left to right, for every constituent, there's multiple barriers that, again, protect public health, protect the quality of the water that we're delivering to customers. Next slide. A lot of pipeline that we're installing, we have installed. We've completed about seven pipeline projects to date, of a total of about 18 separate pipeline projects. about 30 miles or more than 30 miles, like I said. And our pipeline projects look something like this. You've probably seen our work. I've got some more photos coming up here in a little bit. And then one more slide to show you kind of what all these elements look like is this one that shows what our reservoirs will look like when they're constructed. Again, we'll only be building one in the first effort. This photo is actually an aerial of the Fernhill Reservoirs, which is part of the Joint Water Commission system out there in Forest Grove. And so anyways, this is what these tanks will look like, and they hold water to balance our transmission system operations and also to supply water during emergencies or brief shutdowns. Next slide. So let's talk about the progress that we've made to date on the Willamette Water Supply Program. Next slide. So to date, we have completed 7 pipeline projects. We've secured WIFIA loans, which I'll leave for Paul to explain the benefits that provides to the ratepayers. We've received our federal permit for the construction of all of our facilities, completed all of our planning and design for all of our projects. At the end of this year, we'll be advancing all 15 remaining construction projects on the program and continuing our successful partnerships that help us get our work done and also help us manage costs and public impacts on our projects. Next slide. So some of the work that we've completed to date includes the seismic improvements at the raw water intake. As I explained, we're expanding the existing intake, and we're also improving its seismic resiliency. It has to last following a major earthquake event such as the Cascadia subduction zone event. And this shows some of the technologies that we employ to do that, including jet grouting and deep soil mixing to stabilize the soil around the raw water intake so that we know it'll be there following a major earthquake. Next slide. If you've driven around Washington County, you've probably run into one or more of our pipeline projects. They look something like this as you drive by down the road. A large diameter transmission main that we're installing. So there's a lot of construction equipment, excavators, shoring, and so on. But this one in particular, this photo is the pipeline we installed next to Tile Flat Road, where we had to get our pipeline in and out of there and be done with our construction before the development occurred in that South Beaverton area. Next slide. We also do a lot of work at night. We're working in some very busy areas. Like right now we're working, sorry, my phone is ringing. I'm gonna press ignore on that. We're doing work in the near and around the intersection of Hall Boulevard and Shoals Ferry Road. If you're in that part of town around Washington Square, all of that work is being conducted at night because that area is so busy with traffic. The photo here is actually at 209th and Farmington, where we got the permission from Washington County to go ahead and close that road and get this construction done at night, which was found to be the safest, most economical, and quickest way to do that work to having the least impact on the community. Next slide. In addition to crossing roads, we also cross a lot of wetlands. And sometimes we do that using a trenchless technology. So this is an example of where we went trenchless construction beneath Arrowhead Creek. So we employ various technologies and techniques, whether it's to meet multiple objectives, certainly to protect the environment where that's necessary, and also for economic benefits as well. This was actually going trenchless in this particular instance was both for protecting the environment and also found to be the most economical method of getting across Arrowhead Creek here in Wilsonville. Next slide. And then finally, we began construction of the water treatment plant. So this shows an aerial photo looking to the northeast generally. Our water treatment plant is located on the east side of Sherwood, right against Southwest 124th Avenue. And right near a new industrial development in that area. Next slide. So one last thing to speak about this is what's been a regional economic benefit from the program. So far, 91% of the spend on the program has been to local businesses, material suppliers, goods and services. And that means more than $300 million has stayed local. The balance, about another 4% has gone to areas outside of the local area, but still within Washington and Oregon, and about another 5% outside of that area. Next slide. So looking ahead to what do we do in this fiscal year and going forward, we have a lot of work happening. Now that we've completed all of our planning and design, we're going to be at the end of this year, we'll have 15 construction projects all happening simultaneously. So it's going to be a very, very busy period for us from a construction standpoint. We have still a lot of program management to complete and continued acquisitions, some real estate permits and other procurements, and a lot of planning still to be done. When we're complete with the program, we have to make sure that we have water supply integration figured out in terms of delivering this new supply into the existing distribution systems, and along with that, commissioning and startup of the whole water supply system and planning for long-term operations once the system is operational. Make sure that we have all of that figured out well in advance of actually turning the system on. Next slide. So Tom already alluded to this to you, but I want to put a little bit of a finer point on it in terms of where did these cost increases come from. So it was at the end of last year, the end of 2021, that we were bidding the remaining work on the program. We had the remaining projects to bid so that we can get into this major construction period. Toward the end of 2021, we had two of our largest packages to bid, the Reservoir and Pipeline Project and the Water Treatment Plant Project. Now, in developing the estimates that we used for our financial planning, we had a lot of technical experts, industry professionals, and even contractors helping us with our budgeting for those projects. And on the Reservoir and Pipeline Project, we had an estimated cost of $117 million. And that, again, with all of those professionals helping us to come up with that number. When we actually finished competitively bidding that work out on the market, the bid price came back at $143 million, and that was actually the low bid price. So that was the cost of that project at that time. Worse was the water treatment plant that we were bidding right around the same time. It actually began bidding in the fall of 2021. Again, we had an estimated cost that a heck of a lot of effort put into coming up with that cost estimate of $292 million, bid price $427 million. So this was quite a surprise to all of our professionals that were working on this. We did a deep dive to understand the drivers of where are all of these cost impacts coming from. Are they real? Are these fair? Is this really a true representation of where we are in this market? And found that it is. That essentially with all of the lingering impacts of COVID on supply chain issues and labor market issues and material supplies and so on, that looking broadly over the program and the remaining projects that we had to bid is where we forecasted a $315 million increase on the overall program. So where we had been very proud for 7 years to say that we were staying true to our original commitments back in 2013, that this was going to be a $1.3 billion program. It's now a $1.6 billion program. To get this type of work done in this market at this time, it's a $1.6 billion program. Next slide. But with that, that doesn't mean that we take it for granted and take it as it is. We still, on the program, do everything we possibly can to control costs, stay on budget, and reduce costs wherever possible. We will continue to maximize competition on any work that we have going forward to make sure that we're getting the best value for every dollar spent. And when we have a contract when we have a contract signed, we make sure that we negotiate the best prices and quality for any services and goods that we have that we're employing on the program. Still making cost-effective engineering decisions. Even though planning and design are done, that doesn't mean the engineering is done. As we're building all of these very complex facilities and assets, there's still a lot of engineering to be done. A lot of things are learned along the way, and we can still make decisions that can save costs going forward. Proactively managing risks early is another very important strategy that we employ to make sure that we, to the extent we can, is identify all risks that are in front of us and manage them so that they are not realized. Partnering on projects is another opportunity that we use to save costs, so that we're not doing work on our own. We partner wherever we can to share costs. And finally, rigorously managing all aspects of the program to stay on schedule. One way to blow your budget is to lose control of schedule. So as long as we stay on track for being complete in 2026, that affords us our best opportunity to stay within budget in this market. Next slide. I think my last slide here is just about the partnerships that we use on the program. Very important for us in completing our work and staying on budget, frankly. It starts with the program itself is a partnership between TBWD and the cities of Hillsborough and Beaverton, our program partners, and all sharing the costs of everything that we're doing. Aside from that, we partner wherever we can with others that are doing work in the same area. And there's 3 examples here in these photos. The first one is the Kinsman project in the city of Wilsonville, partnered with them and also with ODOT on that particular project where they were building a road. Washington County is building or expanding roads all over the county. We're working with them in many areas to, again, share costs and also reduce public impacts. This particular photo is from the 124th Avenue Partnership Project. And then finally with developers, wherever developers are working in the area, we can find ways to partner or at least coordinate with them. We do so in order to control risks and to control costs. That's the end of my part of the presentation. Next up is Paul Matthews to talk about the finances part of all of these topics. Take it away, Paul.
Well, thank you, Dave. And I'd like to thank all of you who have attended our virtual open house here this noon hour. Appreciate your time. We understand you have busy lives, and your attention to these matters is truly appreciated. As you've heard, I'm Paul Matthews. I'm the district's Chief Financial Officer. It's my responsibility to match the district's infrastructure investment needs with its financial capacities. And for those of you who've been following the district's progress on the line program, you know that I take no joy in discussing the need for money. In fact, few people actually do like to talk about money, whether it's with their family or in a civic organization, but it's an important topic, and so I bring that to you here today. District priorities this for me right now are managing the financial risks for the district and the program, maintaining access to low-cost financing. We'll talk more about that as we talk about the financial challenge we have going forward, and then driving business efficiency and accountability. Those are my 3 main priorities. The district, like all well-managed and responsible utilities, follows a 4-step financial management process, and it starts with the development of a financial plan. The financial plan balances resources and investment and operating expenses over a long period of time. Ours goes out over 30 years, so we're looking at capital improvements that the district needs for out to 30 years and how we're going to finance those by using rates, system development charges, debt, and the various reserves that we acquire. So that's the financial plan begins the process of focusing us and provides a platform which we then move into the budget process. The district has a 2-year biennial budget, meaning that we set the budget for a 2-year period. We present that budget to a citizens budget committee, which approves the budget. It then goes to the board for final adoption. The budget sets our legal appropriation limits over that 2-year period for things like personnel services, capital improvements, material and services, things of that nature. It sets that legal appropriation. And that brings us to where we are right now, which is the rates. So we develop rates that are based on cost of service framework, meaning that the rates are designed such that it imposes the cost on our customers in proportion to the cost of serving those customers, to avoid subsidies of one group of customers versus another. The rates are designed to support the financial plan, the long-term revenue anticipated in the financial plan, as well as the budget process. And then finally, it leaves us to the delivery phase where we deliver customer service, water, and the capital infrastructure that we have in the financial plan and the budget. I want to give you a quick highlight of where we are for the first fiscal year of the biennium. Our fiscal year runs from July 1 of 2021 through June 30 of 2022. The numbers going to present here are unaudited, and they will be audited later this year by our independent financial auditors. But let me start with where are we to date in the biennium on our operating expenditures. What you see in this graph is a comparison of the budget operating expenditures, which are the dotted line, to our actual operating expenditures, which is the solid line. And I'm happy to report that so far in the biennium, we have a favorable variance of $7.8 million, meaning that we have spent $78 million less than what was in our budget. Now, we cannot close out our fiscal year just yet. We are still receiving bills and invoices from vendors that will be, following generally accepted accounting principles, will be dated into the prior fiscal year when those services were received. So that $7.8 million will come down slightly, but essentially we ended the year with a very significant favorable variance in operating expenditures, and that's by design, as we've been managing our operating expenses very, very carefully. Looking at the capital expenditures, similarly, we have a favorable variance there too. We are under budget. This is going to close as the projects that Mr. Kraska just talked about are kicking into gear, and we'll see more money going out to these contractors that we've hired to construct the various facilities that we have. But right now, we do have a favorable variance. We will be entering a period of construction where our contractors will be sending us essentially $1 million a day invoices over the next 12 to 24 months. Water sales revenues, a little bit of a mixed bag for us. We started the biennium strong last year. We had a very cool and wet spring that extended well into June, and that's put us a little bit behind in the latter half of the year. But right now, we still have a favorable variance of about $1 million in water sales revenue, meaning that the revenue is ahead of the budget that we had put together. Following generally accepted accounting practice principles, we will be looking at water that has passed through meters before June 30, but that will be read the meters after June 30. We'll prorate a part of that into the prior fiscal year. And so I'm assuming that that gap, that $1 million favorable variance, may actually narrow a bit from what we'd expected. But nevertheless, water sales, we are statistically right on track. Last revenue element I want to talk about is system development charge revenues. And these are one-time capital charges that we charge when a new customer connects to the system. They're designed so that new customers aren't being subsidized by our existing customers, and then growth pays for itself. We're on track for system development charges so far in the biennium. So in summary, where does that leave us? On the revenue side, we've largely recovered from the COVID-19 impacts that we experienced in the prior year. That wet and cooler spring that I talked about will continue to reduce revenue this summer. And currently we are achieving plan for water sales revenue. On the expenditure side, our management focus on savings to provide flexibility for COVID-19 has been successful. And I talked about that favorable variance that we have there. Our operating expenditures are below budget. We do have higher than anticipated bad debt expense as a result of COVID, and we're monitoring that very carefully, and our capital expenditures are well below budget. As it relates to cash, I'll talk more about our WIFIA draw a little bit later in my presentation, but we have a low interest loan from the EPA. It's called a WIFIA loan. That's at 1.35%. So we've taken a large draw on that, and so the district has ample cash in the near term. We anticipate issuing long-term debt early in 2023 as we continue on with our capital investment. So ending the year in pretty good shape. Where are we in our financial plan going forward? First of all, what brings us here, the key drivers, as Tom Hickman mentioned, are the inflationary increases that we see in the Willamette water supply system. So those inflationary increases have required that we recalibrate our financial plan and increase our financing needs. Increasing our finance needs, and that is going to require then again an increase in our financial capacity to borrow that money. So our strategy, financial strategy that we developed and the board approved earlier this year, and then encapsulated in our currently approved financial plan, was approved in May. First of all, closely manage our operating capital expenditures. We're committed to doing that, maintaining that vigilance on the capital and operating. Pursue federal and state assistance. Actually, Tom Hickman is going to come back and talk about that in just a bit, but we are pursuing assistance from both the federal and state agencies. We're going to increase the financial capacity to ensure that the district has access to the bond market to finance the Willamette water supply system infrastructure at favorable rates. We're going to focus on that by adopting rates that provide financial resources in advance of needing them. So we want to demonstrate strong financial practices by having the money before we go out, the money to repay the debt before we go out and borrow the money. And we're going to continue to refine our customer assistance programs. An important priority for the district. We know that as our costs go up, certainly many of our customers can afford that, but a growing number of our customers are finding it more difficult to pay. So we're continuing to focus on our customer assistance program for those customers. I want to give you a couple examples where the district has focused and manage its cost, just to show you that we are in fact committed to that. And the first example I'm going to give is healthcare costs. So to manage our healthcare costs, the district purchases a high deductible plan from our health insurer. We're self-insured for a portion of that high deductible, and we develop a wellness plan at TBWD that provides an incentive to our employees to use the healthcare spending very wisely. And in fact, as a result of that, we've experienced over the past 4 years an average annual decrease over the past 4 years, each year annually, of 1.9% in the premiums that we pay to our healthcare provider. So just a 1.9% reduction in healthcare cost is the focus that we've got from focusing on this very important part of our budget. The other example I have is on the revenue side. It's our WIFIA draw. I talked about our low interest loan that we have from the WIFIA, an interest rate of 1.35%. On about April, the interest earnings that we could have in U.S. Treasuries, very short-term Treasuries that are consistent with our needs for liquidity, were much higher, been higher than 1.35%. So we took a large draw, invested those in those very secure U.S. Treasury bills and notes, and essentially have been able to save our customers $5 million through the interest earnings that will offset our expense in the future. So just keep assured that we are looking every chance we can to economize for our customers. Tom showed you this chart that illustrates the capital investment needs that the district has in the coming year. And as he mentioned, the blue area and some of the gray areas for the Willamette Water Supply Program. So we really are focused on getting through 2026, which time we'll hit a more stable cost structure that won't have the large investment cycle. But to get us through that period, we have planned investments. Now, if you've been following us and discussing this in the past few years, you know that we did secure a WIFIA loan for about $388 million at that 1.35% interest. We are going to have to go out to the traditional revenue bond market. That's presented by the white bars. The hash bars are the WIFIA loan to fund the remaining part of the program, including the additional amount that we have from these inflationary cost increase in the Willamette Water Supply System. So our current plan is the $388 million WIFIA loan, about $180 million of traditional funding, which will bring us about $570 million of total debt. Now, these numbers are very volatile. They depend on water sales, they depend on growth, they depend on interest rates. There are a lot of factors that go into these numbers. But given the givens and assuming the assumptions, this is what our financial plan is showing right now. All forecasts have risks, and this forecast certainly has its share of risks. There are operational risks that we're all facing. I'm not going to talk about those in depth. Interest rate risk, though, because we are going out and planning to borrow a large sum of money, interest rates are a very important part of our financial future. And the inflationary impact on interest rates can have an effect. We're watching the markets very carefully to make sure that we have access to that low cost investment. We are also on the capital side, increasing in construction cost. Tom mentioned the contractors that we hired to build these things are experiencing higher than anticipated increases in labor costs, things of that nature. We're keeping a very close eye on that. I want to point out the last category of other items that we have. If you've been following us for a while, you might remember that I talked about some of these in past years, including international economic issues. And we did, in fact, have one of those recently with the war in Ukraine. So these things come out when you're least able to handle them. And of course, we're monitoring those things so we can not control them, but we can react to them in advance to provide as much flexibility to the district as possible. So we do have rate increases that we are proposing. The district has two components to its water bill: a fixed monthly charge that varies based on the meter size, and a volume charge. The meter size recovers the cost of the meter, the cost of reading the meter and billing customers, as well as some of the cost of the fire system that we have. We provide water throughout the entire district to meet fire flow requirements. And that, of course, is not a function of how much water you use, but it is important that we provide fire protection to all of our customers. So we are looking at a change in the fixed monthly charges that are presented in this chart. And as I mentioned, we also have volume charges. The district has a 2-block rate structure. The blocks for residential customers, the first block is for all consumption under 14 CCF per month or 28 in a 2-month period. All consumption above that threshold then is at the block 2 rate. And similarly for non-residential customers, the water up to 140% of the 12-month moving average is at the lower block, and the higher block is at that block 2 rate for anything over 140% of the 12-month average. This rate design is specifically established to adhere to our cost of service principle. So customers who take a large volume of water that peak on the system in the summer months drive our investment in our aquifer storage recovery, as well as our cost to purchase water from Portland Joint Water Commission and the sizing of our water system. So in order to have rates that reflect the cost of service, we have a 2-block rate structure to take that peak usage into account. The impact on customer bills varies depending on how much water you have, but what we present here is for a typical customer. This is our most common water bill that we issue. It's for a 5/8 by 3/4 inch meter residential customer, single family residential customer that consumes 7 CCF of water. That's about 5,200 gallons of water, about 22 tons of water. That bill is estimated to go up by about $8.81 starting on November 1st of this year. For those customers that use more water, this is an above average customer consuming 12 CCF of water. I should note that we show these numbers on a monthly basis. Most of our customers are billed on a bi-monthly basis, so most of your bills are on a bi-monthly basis, but to make it more comparable to your other utility bills, we show it here on the monthly basis. We are looking for that customer that's almost 9,000 gallons of water per month. That's more than 37 tons of water per month, going up by $13.21. And then for a high-use customer, a very high-use residential customer, this is almost 21,000 gallons of water, or over 87 tons of water. We're looking at an increase of about $32.47 per month. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Hickman to make some closing remarks.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to everyone again who's attending and being patient here as we go through this. Real quickly, can you go to the next slide, Paul? We've been doing our best to manage these impacts. We were successful in, as the WWSS, or the Willamette Water Supply System, we were successful in getting $1 million grant through the House appropriations in 2021 for the treatment plant. And then again, just a few weeks ago, we got an additional $3 million through Representative Bonamici through the House appropriations. That is another grant that we can apply to the project. We worked with Senators Wyden and Merkley, and they did put into their request of the Senate appropriations a $20 million appropriation for this project. Unfortunately, that did not make the final cut in the Senate, and ultimately we were unsuccessful there. And then we are currently working with and meeting with a number of state legislators to talk to them about a $75 million request from the state infrastructure funding program, and we'll be working through those representatives, state representatives here in this next session coming up in the new year. So we're trying to pursue all the dollars we can, as well as trying to be financially prudent here. And Paul mentioned the healthcare savings that we've been able to achieve, and also the WIFIA money that we were successful in actually drawing on, and then able to make some money on that draw, $5 million. So all of that, yes, it's small in comparison to the total cost of the project, and small in terms of the cost of what the increases have been, but we are trying very hard to find dollars where we can and how we can. So with that, we'd like to get to your questions, and this is the second open house that we've had. We had one yesterday, last night. We will have an in-person one this Saturday, and there's going to be a board meeting next week that you're also welcome to either participate or send any information to so that they can consider it. Do want to point out we do have board members that you elect that are on this call now. They're listening and take your comments and concerns very seriously, as do we all. And we do understand none of us want to be in a position that we're having to tell you your rates are going up. We wish we could tell you they aren't, but the reality is cost of living goes up, and that impacts our ability to deliver water. And then just on closing, a reminder to put this in some perspective. Paul Matthews mentioned the tonnage of water that's delivered in those gallons. And you know, we sometimes lose perspective or context of these kind of resources. So we're delivering this water currently to you 24/7, 365 days a year, safe, reliable water for a cost of less than 1.5 cents per gallon. That's a pretty remarkable thing when you actually think about that, and I can't think of any other natural resource that is delivered to you on demand for that low of a cost. It's a pretty amazing thing. So we do believe we are doing our very best to manage these costs, and we will continue to do so. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Justin to let him moderate some of these questions.
Thank you, Tom, and don't go too far away. The first few are going to be for you. We've got 3 questions that appears are from the same customer. First one is that, why are we being penalized for watering our lawns and gardens in the summer as a result of water rates go up for higher usage? States like Utah has second irrigation line for a very low rate.
So I can speak to some of this. I think Paul can also speak to this. I wouldn't say, I guess I would push back a little bit on the idea that you're being penalized. There's a certain cost for us to make that water available. And so the cost of making that water available is what you pay. When you're using a larger volume of water, you pay for that higher volume of water compared to somebody who uses a lower volume of water. So our rates are set up based on the volume of water you use is reflected in what you pay. I am aware of places that have a second line for irrigation and a second meter. And in many of those cases, I do not know Utah specifically, they are actually delivering water from a second system, and are actually delivering sometimes untreated water to those irrigation systems. And so and depending upon the situation, they can do that at a lower cost, but that is not broadly done or widely done. Those tend to be pretty unique situations around the country. Paul, is there anything I missed on that you feel like would be of value?
Well, I hope that I covered this a little bit in my presentation, but our rates are designed around the policy of cost of service, following industry standard approaches that the American Water Works Association provides us, so that the design of that rate is for customers who do peak during the summer months. That's when water is the least plentiful, the most expensive for us to acquire and deliver, that other customers who don't peak aren't subsidizing them. So it's based on cost of service. I'm not familiar with what's happened in Utah. I suspect Typically, when there's a second irrigation line, usually most jurisdictions around the country cost a little bit more, not less. And oftentimes that water is available to be interrupted in the event of a curtailment. For example, in Southern California, where they'll require businesses to have a second irrigation line and they'll cut that off should they get into a curtailment situation. But I don't know the specifics in Utah. It may be either something unique about that organization or it could be non-potable water. But the design here at TVWD is to meet the cost service criteria that we have.
Thank you both. And Paul, don't go far. I think this next one will be best suited for you. Question is the example in your letter, family of 4 for 7 CCF, way understated, meaning the rate increase is much higher. I believe this question is getting to the methods you've used to figure out that average monthly increase in cost.
Well, so it's a typical bill. And 7 CCF is the most common, 7 CCF per month, 14 over a 2-month period is the most common bill that we do issue. I'm not sure which letter you're referring to or 4 people per household. I think that's probably a little bit higher than the typical household that statistically speaking, it really doesn't matter the details though. What we use is the 7 CCF, which is the most commonly issued bill that we have here at the district for residential customers.
Thank you, Paul. And last one here, I'll take an opportunity just to remind folks, if you have any questions, please type them into the thought bubble that looks like it has a question mark inside of it. But as of right now, this is our last question of the Q&A. It is going to be for Paul again. Because this is the second increase in less than a year, does it mean that your finance staff made a mistake on cost projection?
Yeah, well, this isn't the second increase in the year. The last increase that we had went through this process last August. We had the public hearing at the regular meeting in August, and the final decision was made in September and implemented November 1st. So we're on the same schedule that we've been traditionally. As it relates to the second increase, this could be, as I think Andrew, maybe Tom mentioned, you may have a clean water service bill that went up on July 1st. That's a separate, that's the sewer and swim part. We bill that in conjunction with clean water services in the city of Beaverton too, in some circumstances, just to keep the cost down. It's one of our regional partnerships to save money as we do that in conjunction with the wastewater utility. So that could be how you would have 2 increases, but the water side, no, it hasn't been changed. And has there been a mistake from the finance staff? I would say no. That if we look at our water sales revenue, they're on track. That's an incredibly difficult thing to project because there are weather dependencies and everything else. Really, what's causing this increase is what Tom and Mr. Kraska talked about, which was the unexpected bid result or the unexpected result that we had in December for the water supply, for the water treatment plant. So I might defer to Dave or Tom if they want to add anything more to that.
So I just would like to, second what you just said, Paul. I think if you look around the country, even globally, I think many people, economists, finance estimators, it was really impossible to forecast the kinds of increases that we are seeing. We try our best to be reasonable in our estimates, because if we overestimate, then you end up paying for something that doesn't come to fruition. So there is a balancing there. I think we took a very balanced approach with making a cut of $50 million to our capital program in order to allow for some increases to happen. I don't think any of us foresaw that, and frankly, anyone, and not just limited to our staff, I don't think anyone anywhere expected to see increases of the magnitude that we saw and have seen over the last 6 months. So we do our best. But in the end, if we actually could forecast that well and knew that we were going to see those increases coming, I think our finance staff would all be, being asked to be working at firms in Wall Street. So we all do our best.
Thanks, Tom. And we do have one final question from Chuck, who wrote in and asks, how will this new rate compare to the rate in the cities such as Beaverton and Hillsborough? And I think this will be for Paul.
Yes, so I'm not familiar with what actions precisely that Hillsborough and Beaverton have. Obviously, they're partners in the program, so they're going to have to make up, they're going to have to provide their capital to invest in the water supply system as well. But right now, we are taking actions that are going to move our rates ahead of theirs. So we will have higher rates than both of those communities as we continue to invest in the system. But eventually, I think we'll see rate increases throughout the region as people make their investments.
Thanks, Paul. And that wraps up the Q&A for today. That's the final question. I'll turn it back over to Andrea and Tom. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you again for joining us. I don't know if you have any closing remarks, but we're a little bit over. As we said in the chat, we'll stay on with you as long as you do have questions, but hearing none here, we'll just say we again thank you for giving us your lunch hour to learn more about your water provider.
And I agree, and thank you very much for attending.